What's up, y'all? I know I've been flooding you with vlogs these last few days, but I've just been working on this crazy, weird, super heady post for my main channel lately, and the process of working on it has been sending me on all these crazy mental thought tangents and having all these fucking ideas that are too big to fit into that video, which is what inspired my Sword Art Online versus Asterisk War video yesterday, and is also inspiring this one. And and then I got drunk after making that last one and ate a bunch of Lunchables, and it's been a weird couple of days. But anyways, I want to talk about a phenomenon that I've observed of people describing certain pieces of media, certain styles of media as being very subjective. Or usually I hear the phrase like, music is so subjective that it's hard to talk about. I hear that all the time. It's hard to talk about it because it's so subjective. Now, you probably are well aware of how I feel about the concept of objectivity in art, that it doesn't exist at all, but I'm interested in this because I don't really think people mean that it's so subjective. I think what they really mean is that the rules are harder to define, because when it comes to, let's say, film, mainstream film, there's a very clear sort of cultural idea of what is a good film. There's only so much disagreement that really happens over films. You've got people who like them, people who don't like them, and usually those people's reasons for liking them fall into, just a few different parameters. It's rare that someone likes a movie for like a totally out there reason, or hates a movie for a totally out there reason. And as such, the idea of what makes a good movie, what makes people like a movie, is pretty easily understood and shared amongst so many critics. I watch lots and lots of critical analysis videos on YouTube. I read a lot of, criticism of films, and I've found that there's a lot of consensus there. I'll see a new movie come out and watch 10 reviews that all basically say the exact same thing. Now, the thing about movies is that there's not a lot of them. They're compared to, say, album releases, of which there are many every day, like possibly hundreds every day of albums being released, if you count everything on Bandcamp, everything released onto the internet. There's just constant music coming out. But with movies, you've got only so many of them that make it to theaters. And for a lot of critics, they don't even really consider movies that, don't make it to theaters. That's sort of the step or at least to film festivals. Like, you have to have some semblance of legitimacy of being published before people are going to look at your film. And for a lot of critics, they really only follow popular movies. There's a huge circuit of critics for just popular movies. And popular movies are, by and large, trying to have the same effect all the time. Every big blockbuster movie is going for the same thing. Nab as many people's money as possible. Just reach the widest possible audience. And as such, they appeal to the most basic fundamental rules. They're all trying to have a big audience, so they all follow clear rules. And as such, it's very easy for someone to start critiquing films and for everyone to get where they're coming from pretty much immediately. Because if you know popular films, you've watched, more than a handful of them, or you've watched more than a handful of reviews of popular films, then you figure out the rules really quick. Now, when it comes to music, the funny thing about music is that there is a certain section of music that's like popular films, which is pop music. Music that's on the radio that usually follows pretty much the same rules all the time, the same kinds of song structures, the same types of melodies and mixing and stuff like that, And don't get me wrong, there are some songs that could be, sometimes I'm listening to the radio and two songs play back to back that sound totally different, even though they're on the same network or same station and considered to be part of the same genre. But by and large, pop music has much more clearly defined rules. But here's the thing. It's way more accepted to not listen to pop music than it is to be someone who watches weird, different auteur films. It's pretty normal to be into other genres of music, to have a broad, eclectic taste in music. There's lots of people who are like that. And when you try to go and explain why you like the music you like, oftentimes the difficulty is that there's no easy standard, and people are so used to having different tastes from one another that it's way harder to be relatable, you know? If I put out a review of a film right now, any film, and I held it to what I think is a widely considered consensus standard for films, most of my audience would get it. Whereas if I make a review of, let's say, some rap album that I like, and I talk about just like what makes it good in a very general sense, you know, without like getting into deep analytical ideas about it, then anyone who doesn't like rap music already doesn't get it at all. They already have no idea what I'm talking about. You know, they have no context into what makes a good rap song, or what makes a good, you know, like what the different styles of rap are, what this thing might even be, what the fuck I'm talking about, you know? So instantly, I have a limited audience to people who appreciate that genre, which is why there are channels on YouTube that are just rap analysis or rap reviews, you know? And then even then, breaking it down even further, you know, it's so much more common for people to have widely different tastes. And that's what people mean when they say it's so subjective. They mean that, like, the subjectivity of it is more obvious because everyone obviously has different taste in music. Whereas in movies, sometimes if you have an opinion that's widely different or wildly different from, like, what is the more commonly held opinions, then you look like the oddball. You look like the guy who doesn't seem to obey the generally accepted rules. Whereas with music, there are far fewer generally accepted rules. And that's why for me, I've always felt like if I wanted to get into talking about music, it would have to be, you basically have two ways you can do it. One route is the Anthony Fantano route, the needle drop, who is the biggest music YouTuber I know of, and one of the only people who's like really doing it in a big way and really dedicates himself to nothing but music reviews. And the reason that he's able to do that is that he reviews everything that comes out, and so you can kind of gain an understanding of what his standards are because he has so many reviews. But even with him, there's a reason that he gets these crazy dislike bars or crazy attacks on him when he reviews a popular album, because anyone who doesn't understand his standard, you know, will watch those videos and disagree with the things he's saying because it's so common for people to feel totally differently about what makes a good song, you know? The only reason I understand Fantano's perspective on music is that I've seen enough of his videos to understand the standard he's portraying. So when he writes a 5-minute video about an album, I still get it. But if I wanted to review an album that I love, I have to completely establish my whole standard from the ground up. I have to explain everything that I feel about music, everything that makes me like music, because there's no like standard that's already in place that everyone's going to relate to, that everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, of course that's what makes that song good, you know? So it just takes so much more explanation. And I think it's kind of a shame that movies have rules that are so widely accepted. And again, part of it is that movies are all trying to follow the same rules. I think most popular movies are all going for the same thing, and that's why it's so easy to judge them to that same standard. But I think it's a shame because so many people have taken that standard that is so commonly spoken as being objective, as being the standard, as being what it means to critique something, when really it would be way more interesting if people were actually, for every movie, explaining from the ground up. You know, starting from the bottom and detailing everything in that movie that's making them feel the things that they're feeling, as opposed to just taking it for granted that you get why, you know, a movie being paced a certain way is a good thing. You know, I'd rather that people were explaining why that pacing means something to them, because I might not necessarily agree with it, and taking it for granted that I would can be really frustrating, which is why, for some people, when they see a critical review of something they like can get so frustrated with that person seeming to have a totally different standard from themselves, you know? And I think it's funny that everyone kind of recognizes this with music, but they kind of brushed it off as like music is subjective. Like, why would music be different? Why would it be any different from any other medium? Why would that one just for no reason be more subjective or just like not have the same things going on, you know? It's not that it's more subjective, it's that it's a much harder to define standard. And so, you know, in order to write about music, you really gotta fucking, you know, either crank out really long videos or a whole lot of them until people get your perspective. And even then, there's gonna be those who don't, but, you know, there always will be those who don't. So anyway, that's why I think we have so many movie critics, because it's so easy to get into movie criticism because everyone gets where you're coming from. Whereas with music, it's nightmare.